In the summer of 1845, a new plant disease appeared in Ireland, and 3 months later, 25% of the potato crop, the peasantry's main source of food, was destroyed. Britain, which ruled 19th century Ireland, rushed over a large supply of Indian corn, and from cabin to castle was hailed as a savior. Alas, gratitude proved premature. When the disease reappeared the following year and destroyed 90% of the crop, the British response was much less forthcoming. Direct government aid was sharply curtailed, and too poor to fund its own relief, Ireland quickly collapsed into starvation and disorder. Passing through the Irish countryside in November of 1846, 4 months after the second crop failure, an English traveler found himself in a blood race. The roads were filled with armed men and pauper women begging with dead infants in their arms. The bodies of children were flung into ditches and ravines. Packs of feral dogs roamed the glens in search of human remains. Every field has become a grave, a land of wilderness, the Englishman exclaimed. Then, at the beginning of December 1846, it began to snow, as it had not snowed in Ireland for many years. Snow fell down through the cold, still air and covered the peasant workdays, digging ditches and decapitating hills. The immigrants fleeing on the Liverpool packets, the tide lines of turnip fields, where shoeless women and children collected seaweed, and the icy cliffs where the starving searched for seagull eggs in a sharp white wind. Snow covered the 5,000 paupers shivering in the doorways of court, the half-naked country people bartering their clothes for food in the streets of Limerick, and the uncoffined dead who had come to their final rest in the shadow of the cold mountains. One morning, not long after Christmas 1846, a carriage halted in front of a cabin outside of Skibbereen, a market town in southwest Cork. The driver picked up a blood-soiled box on the carriage seat and handed it to the farmer who had come out to greet him. "My dog brought it home last night," the driver said apologetically, and was off. The farmer watched his visitor disappear over a rise, then opened the box and immediately shut it again. After collecting himself, the farmer carried the box inside and put it under his bed. Tomorrow he would return his wife's decapitated head to her grave. By early 1847, sights that poison life till life is done had become routine in Ireland, and everyone who still had the strength and the means was trying to get out. People were no longer immigrating, they were fleeing, the way a crowd flees a burning building, heedlessly, recklessly, on ships that had no business on any ocean, let alone a winter ocean, and often in defiance of the family bonds the Irish were justly famous for, in the overpowering desire to get out. Husbands deserted wives, parents, children, brothers, sisters. The immigrants of this year are unlike those of former year, the Cork Examiner declared in February of 1847. People are now actually running away. Ask a famine immigrant his destination that winter, and he would have told you anywhere that wasn't Ireland. Among those too old, too young, too ill, poor, or frightened to leave, the appearance of mass death compressed life into a single wish, a coffin to be buried in. However, in an Ireland scorned by God, even that was too much to ask. One day that famine winter, Bridie Sheehan came home and found her 16-year-old daughter dead. Bridie, who had already buried her husband and son, had no money for another coffin, recalled an old storyteller. So she got some water and washed the girl and dressed her up. Then she went out to the garden, where there was a little haycock, and gathered enough hay to twist a rope. She put her dead daughter on her back, holding the girl up with the rope. Bridie carried her rope until she reached the chapel, the storyteller said. But having reached it, the poor woman was too weak to dig a hole. Eamon Delaney, a neighbor, saw her and came over. "It's a terrible story," Bridie said. "Christ's story was worth," Bridie replied. Gregory Ash, another neighbor, saw Bridie too, and he came over, and together they buried the daughter. Later, after the girl was laid out in a hole next to her father and brother, Bridie came and stood over the bodies. "God bless ye all," she said. "Nobody else will join ye now. There's only me, and there will be nobody to look after me, to bury me, or anything else." Then Bridie made her way back home, very slowly. That night, it snowed again. Snow fell on every part of the dark central plain, on the treeless hills, on the bog of Allen, and further westward into the dark, mutinous Shannon waves. It fell faintly through the universe, like the descent of the last end upon the living and the dead. What made the famine so devastating? The role of simple bad luck cannot be ignored. Had the potato failed 2 generations earlier, when Ireland had a lower rate of potato dependency, or 2 generations later, when the economy was on a sounder footing, the demographic impact might have been less severe. But the potato failed in the mid-1840s, when a generation-long collapse in peasant living standards had made the bottom 2/3 of the nation solely or almost solely reliant on the potato. And Ireland had not yet developed the physical, commercial, and human infrastructure needed to cope with a major catastrophe. There were not enough food stores to feed the suddenly potatoless peasantry, not enough mills to process the provisions that had to be imported, not enough physicians to cope with the historic pestilence that broke out, and not enough engineers, administrators, or other trained personnel to organize and manage an efficient relief effort. A modern example of the difference such resources can make is the contrasting experiences of Haiti, the country with an undeveloped infrastructure, where in 2010, an earthquake of magnitude 7.0 killed 85,000 people. And Japan, a sophisticated, resource-rich country, where in 2011, an earthquake of 9.0 magnitude, much more severe, a tsunami and a nuclear meltdown produced a death toll of less than 25,000. In 1845, Ireland was Haiti. However, bad luck can only explain so much. British policymakers also bore much responsibility for what happened. The accusation is not new, of course, but the modern brief against Britain contains a different set of particulars. The old Irish nationalist charge that London pursued a deliberate policy of genocide has been discredited. Modern research has also tempered another old charge. With the exception of one critical period in late 1846 and early 1847, famine Ireland actually imported more food than she exported. What turned a natural disaster into human disaster was the determination of senior British officials to use relief policy as an instrument of nation building in one of the most poorest and most turbulent parts of the empire. In particular, Whitehall and Westminster were eager to modernize the Irish agricultural economy, which was widely viewed as the principal source of Ireland's poverty and chronic violence, and to improve the Irish character, which was regarded as undisciplined, slothful, and prone to an alarming dependence on government. The result was a relief program that in its particulars was more interested in social engineering than in saving lives. An example is the way London used relief to foster a key element in the modernization plan, the creation of a network of large commercial farms, or what we would today call agribusinesses. Advocates of the scheme believed that commercial farming would not only make Irish agriculture more efficient, the farms could be used as schools of socialization, subject to the rigorous discipline of a time clock and a British overseer. The character of the Aboriginal Irish, to use a favorite term of the period, could be recast to put it in tune with the more rigorous values of the new industrial age. But how do you transform 1 million or so bloody-minded peasants into a landless agricultural proletariat without setting Ireland ablaze? The famine provided an answer to this perennially vexing question. In order to qualify for relief, the British stipulated that the small farmer had to surrender his land. The British plan to promote self-reliance was another example of famine-era social engineering. Making an impoverished Ireland fund its own relief proved a real boon to Irish tax collectors, whose numbers increased by 222% during the famine, and to Irish coffee makers, whose numbers increased by 187%, but not to the Irish peasantry who were doing most of the dying. With saving lives reduced to a second-order priority, the famine death toll continued its relentless march upward, carrying the headless mothers under one arm and the starving children under the other. In The Last Conquest of Ireland, John Mitchell, a founding father of modern Irish nationalism, depicted the British officials who presided over the famine as genocidal gargoyles, sort of predecessors of Hitler and Himmler. They were not. In the main, they were wakeful-minded, God-fearing, and by their own lights, well-intentioned men. And that's what makes them so depressing. If the famine has any enduring lesson to teach, it's about the harm even the best are capable of when the best lose their way and allow religion and political ideology to introduce reason and humanity. Unfortunately, this lesson still remains largely unlearned. Writing graves in the age of the Tea Party, I was struck again and again with the parallels between the 1840s and our own time. The Irish famine, I think, can justly claim to be the birthplace of many of our modern arguments over government, taxes, and immigration. Charles Trevelyan, the British official who oversaw famine relief, was so intent on rooting out what he called the cankerworm of government dependency from the Irish character that he ordered relief food be sold rather than dispensed free, a decision that led to the needless death of tens of thousands. To my famine-trained ear, the words Paul Ryan used last March in introducing his plan to scale back government programs like Medicare and Medicaid eerily echoed Trevelyan's warning. Ryan declared that America was at an insidious moral tipping and went on to complain that a government safety net lulls able-bodied people into lives of complacency and dependency. Mr. Trevelyan could not have said it better. Another prominent famine echo is the resurgence of fundamentalist capitalism. Now, as in the 1840s, the free market is depicted not just as a useful economic tool, but as a moral force, an almost spiritual instrument that can improve one's character as well as establish a reign of eternal prosperity. Thus, when a delegation from a starving County Mayo visited the Dublin offices of Sir Randolph Rodd, the head of the Irish Relief Commission, to request a supply of food, Roth instead gave his visitors from Mayo a lecture on laissez-faire economics and a copy of Edmund Burke's pamphlet, Details on Scarcity, in which Mr. Burke explains why, even in periods of famine and social breakdown, the free market can deliver food more efficiently and cheaply than any government. No doubt, if Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged had been available, the Mayo delegation would have went home with a copy of it. Researching graves, I was also struck by how little our arguments over immigration have changed. Every racist thing that was said about Italian, Jewish, Polish, and now Hispanic immigrants was said first about the famine Irish, who nearly 1 million strong descended on the U.S. in the 1840s and 50s. The newcomers were accused of undercutting the wages of the American workman, threatening the Protestant character of the country, of being idle, shiftless reprobates who were a burden of God-fearing, overtaxed Yankees everywhere. No one, except perhaps the Irish themselves, were surprised when a well-known phrenologist declared that the pattern of bumps on the Irish skull proved beyond doubt, beyond scientific doubt, that the immigrants were reckless, vehement, ignorant, dependent people. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, the loudest famine echo I encountered was over taxes, when the London Times wrote that Irish relief threatened to cost every British taxpayer a shilling per year. An indignant Liverpool reader sent the paper an angry letter. "The Irish are a race of audacious beggars," he wrote. Contrary to what you may have heard, history can repeat itself, and sometimes does, with a vengeance. I'm not defending anything they did, but the peasantry, the farmers, the tenant farmers, which is 60 to 70, close to 70% of the population, then was most vulnerable, and anything that went wrong, they were immediately going to pay for it. The British made a great mistake by allowing exports to continue in the fall of 1846, and I say that in the book. Any time that in a subsistence society that a major crop fails, there's always the potential for